This is National Geographic Channel presents what led to the mysterious rise and fall of the barbarians known as Vikings. They conquered nature's fury at sea, and on land, shields and riveted ringed armor gave them the upper hand. Why did these raiders by design enjoy 2 centuries of success and then vanish? The secrets of the Viking warriors revealed. They were once the most feared men in Europe, an unstoppable band of ruthless warriors, Vikings. For 1,200 years, the Vikings have been famed for their bloodlust, their barbarism, their prowess in war. But how much of the image is actually true? New research now shows there's more to the Vikings than meets the eye. Through a series of unique experiments, we will discover how the Vikings used groundbreaking technology to conduct long-range seaborne raids, how the Vikings applied skills long since forgotten to the making of weapons, and how the Vikings hardwired themselves for a new kind of war. By recreating hardware and know-how that has lain hidden for 12 centuries, scientists aim to reveal the secrets of the Vikings. The story begins on an island off the coast of northern England, the year 793 AD. In the monastery of Lindisfarne, the monks were going about their devotions. The date was Saturday, June 8th. It was to become a day of infamy. Without warning, a group of ships appeared on the horizon. They were headed straight for the monastery. Suddenly, the ships were disgorging men. Armed raiders stormed ashore. The monks knew their assailants. They were traders from the lands of the far north, modern Scandinavia. History would come to call them by an ancient word for pirates: Vikings.
The word Viking is first recorded in an Old English document, and there the word piraticum, which means a pirate expedition, is translated Vikingaferð, which means a journey of Vikings.
In an orgy of violence, the Vikings ransacked the monastery and butchered the monks. No one was spared. The Vikings looted many priceless pieces of ecclesiastical treasure and simply disappeared. It was outrageous, it was audacious, and it must have been premeditated.
Lindisfarne was an extremely important site within the Kingdom of Northumbria. It was the seat of the major monastery of the Northumbrian kingdom, and the fact that the early Viking raids struck there cannot be coincidence. They must have known exactly where they were going and what they were doing.
But it was only the beginning. Raids on Scotland, Ireland, and France came next. The Saxon and Frankish world was suddenly under sustained assault. But what were the motives behind the Viking raids? Some historians believe the causes were purely economic. Gold hoarded by the church in Western Europe was a powerful lure. But others see a political motive. Europe was Christian, but the Vikings were not. And the biggest ruler in Europe, the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne, was waging a brutal war on the pagans of the north. Maybe the raids were a warning to the Christians to back off. Whatever the cause, one thing is certain. The raids triggered a chain of events that were to change the face of the world. Within 50 years, the Vikings had conquered most of England. Within 100 years, they had attacked the world's richest empire, Byzantium. Within 200 years, their ships had reached across the Atlantic to Greenland and the fringes of North America. The Vikings made an indelible mark on history. Yet the question remains, how did they pull it off? What secrets lie behind the incredible achievements of the Vikings? For medieval historian Sarah Foote, the answer may lie in the written accounts of the people who lived through the Viking Age. Her research has uncovered many valuable leads, clues to the genius at work behind Viking success. For her, the monastic writings of 1,200 years ago bring to life the awesome spectacle of the Vikings at full bore.
These are the Annals of St. Vast, and this is for the year 884. The Northmen never stopped enslaving and killing Christian people, bringing down churches, demolishing fortifications, burning down towns. For on every road lay the corpses of the clergy and laity, noblemen and commoners, women, youths and babies.
What stands out most from the contemporary sources is the sense of outrage that the first Viking raids provoked.
You get a very clear sense of the horror of this completely unexpected attack. I think for 8th century Christians all over Europe, this was almost their equivalent of 9/11.
But why the shock? The monks were Christian propagandists. In the wake of the attacks, they had an interest in portraying the Vikings as a plague from God. By reading between the lines, Foote begins to find clues to the secrets of Viking success. Militarily, it seems the Vikings were doing something new, something unstoppable.
The sources do suggest that there was something different about these raids, that this was a different sort of warfare. These attacks come seemingly from nowhere out of the sea, and that's what most attracts their attention. All the sources comment on the fact that these are sea-born warriors.
This is significant. If contemporary chroniclers describe the raids as different because they came from the sea, what did they make of the ships the raiders sailed in?
But there is a later 11th century account which talks about the elegant decorations on the keels that would dazzle the eyes of observers. You could see a flash of the glitter of armour, the fire of hanging shields. I'm sure this is a highly literary, embellished account, but the idea that these fleets were different from those that Europeans were producing, I think, is the important factor to get out of these texts.
Foote's exploration of contemporary accounts builds a vivid picture of the strengths of the Vikings and the weakness of the opposition. Coastal communities were unprepared and powerless against the sudden appearance of Viking ships. The longship was to assume an almost mythical status. The technology behind it was a wonder of the age. At the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, Norway, stands an extraordinary example of Viking ship design. Protected by the clay in which it was buried, the ship has survived more than 1,100 years. They call it the Gokstad. It's named after the place where it was excavated in 1880. It's one of the largest Viking ships ever discovered.
The Gokstad is 24 meters long, which would give you about 80 feet, 5 meters wide amidships, 16 feet. Was rowed by 32 men, sitting 16 on each side.
The Gokstad had been used as a burial chamber and contained a wealth of Viking artifacts. But what does the Gokstad tell us about Viking maritime success? Experts have long been fascinated by the design and construction of its hull. The first thing they noticed was how thin the hull planks were.
For a ship that size, they are very thin. They are about 2.5 centimeters thick, about 1 inch, which is not much for an 80-foot vessel.
The hull shape is also very distinctive, aerodynamic in appearance, relatively narrow, with a high prow. Experts like Arne Emil Christensen claim the construction and shape gave the Gokstad an immediate advantage: speed.
These very flexible light hulls have a tendency to plane, not like a modern speedboat, but in more or less the same idea. They lift on their own bow wave, and they get up to very great speed. They get more stable as the speed increases. Replicas of the Gokstad ship have logged over 16 knots, which is very fast for a sailing vessel.
It's an incredible thought. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings had ships that could plane across the water like a hydrofoil, thereby achieving speed phenomenal for the time. Here at a research tank in Southampton University, England, we put this concept to the test. The test tank holds a model of the Gokstad ship. The waves in the tank are set at a regular rate of 1 every 4 seconds, the equivalent of fine sailing conditions in the North Sea. As the model reaches its target speed, a remarkable thing starts to happen. The bow begins to lift through the waves. The model has demonstrated that the hull design was the determining factor in the ship's capability of handling high speeds. But no matter what the hull shape, all ships create turbulence and drag in the water. To achieve high speed, Viking shipwrights must have found a way to minimize drag. But how? At the Oslo Viking Ship Museum, the Gokstad vessel offers a clue. The hull planking is overlapped. It's called clinker building. For that era, it was not an unusual construction feature, but it provides the final piece of the puzzle. On the open sea, a full-scale replica Viking ship shows why. As the ship picks up speed, the overlap planking draws air under the hull, cushioning it against the water, reducing drag and turbulence. According to some experts, it's the unique combination of hull construction and hull shape that accounts for Viking speed.
The ships don't push themselves through the waves like a modern vessel does, but it rides over the waves. And that is partly because of the overlapping planks, which draw in a little air under the ship, and partly because of the hull shapes.
So how did the Vikings build their marine masterpieces? Here at Roskilde Boatyard in Denmark, archaeologists and engineers have teamed up to construct a replica longship using the same methods and materials as the Vikings used over 1,000 years ago. It's a fantastic piece of retro engineering, and it's yielding important clues about the secrets behind Viking shipbuilding.
One of the main things that we have learned is about the craftsmanship involved in shipbuilding technologies and about the knowledge that they had about their materials.
The hull consists of oak timbers 50 feet long, yet so flexible that when the boat builder chisels the wood, it ripples. This particular piece is called a stringer. It runs the length of the ship and will hold in place the spars that will take the hull planking.
This piece is split out of one log. It can bend a lot without breaking. So I can show you here. Take it in the end here now, and you can easily bend it. Yes, I think 1 meter like this here.
Light enough to be lifted by just one man, the wooden stringer bends by up to 14 degrees.
That's important because the whole construction here can only stand the force from the sea because it's flexible. So the whole shell have to be flexible.
Such flexibility can be achieved only one way, by splitting single planks from massive tree trunks. This involves driving wedges into the wood to exploit its natural fissures. It's a process called cleaving. And for this kind of shipbuilding, cleaving has advantages over a modern saw. Sawing cuts across the grain. Cleaving splits the wood along the grain, thereby retaining the wood's natural strength.
The result of cleaving and not sawing is that when you're cleaving like this, you can see we are not following the fibers here. The tree is following the fibers. It's cleaving like it is growing. So when you cleave it like this, you're not cutting the fibers over, you can say. So therefore it gets very strong.
Such methods reveal how well the Vikings were adapted to their environment. Their understanding of the potential offered by nature helped them become the best marine engineers of their day. But speed isn't everything. Viking ships were legendary for being able to strike anywhere, apparently at will. That meant one thing: they were not only fast, they were also highly maneuverable. But how did they achieve this maneuverability?
Next, with sails of wool, how will a replica Viking ship fare in a race against a modern yacht? And they're off. When National Geographic Channel Presents returns. And now, back to Secrets of the Viking Warriors.
These mysterious stone tablets are over 1,000 years old. Found on the Swedish island of Gotland in the middle of the Baltic Sea, they provide the only contemporary illustration of Viking ships under sail.
One thing that is very important with this picture stone is that they give us archaeologists a very good picture of the Vikings, because you don't see them anywhere else in the world how the ship looked like.
The sails are square. The cross-hatching effect is created by what appears to be a complex form of rigging. The men holding ropes suggest that the ship could be steered.
You see every man sitting and holding a rope and steering the sail with that one, so the ship could actually cross towards the wind rather easily.
This means the Vikings could tack their sails into the wind and steer in almost any direction. The exact way in which the Vikings rigged their ships remains a mystery, because no complete set of rigging has survived. But what has survived is this: a fragment of sailcloth. It's identifiable by the eyelet that would have once held a rope. What's remarkable, however, is what it's made of. Modern sails tend to be made of plastic or canvas. In the Middle Ages, linen was often used. But as the fragment reveals, the Vikings made sails out of something different: wool. The question is, why? Amy Lightfoot is an expert in ancient textiles and runs a cloth-making workshop that uses traditional Scandinavian methods. She and her team have so far made sailcloth for 3 replica longships.
Yeah, well, here you have it. It's one of our woolen sails, one of 3 larger projects we've done in the past few years. It's a really big sail, which you can't see just here, but it's a sail designed for an ocean-going vessel. And as you can imagine, it's taken an awful lot of work to produce.
Contrary to what one might think, wool gave Viking sails a distinct advantage.
The big advantage of wool is that you can actually sail higher up into the wind because of the elasticity of wool, which is very, very different from elasticity of other types of fiber. It has an enormous capacity to return the shape. It can be blown out, but it returns back to its original shape.
The Vikings used wool from a particular breed of primitive sheep. These are Spelsau sheep. Their fleece consists of a double coat, the outer layer of which is naturally water repellent.
The wool from these sheep is quite different from modern breeds. You have softer underwool, which is closest to the animal's skin, and outer, coarser guard hairs, which are water repellent.
The wool was sorted and spun into 2 kinds of yarn. The skeins were woven together using a special kind of loom. Modern looms are horizontal, but the Viking loom was vertical. The yarn held in place by free-hanging weights. According to Lightfoot, the loom used by the Vikings produced superior woolen cloth.
The genius of the warp-weighted loom is its simplicity. The end product was much more tightly woven, and it made actually better cloth in a way than you can accomplish on a horizontal loom.
The tight weave was not only hard-wearing, its density enhanced the wool's natural elasticity and impermeability, important qualities for a sail. In its time, the Viking longship was in a class of its own. But could it possibly match the performance of a modern sailing vessel? Under certain conditions, maybe it could. We asked the marine experts at Roskilde Museum to race a replica Viking longship against a modern yacht. The yacht they chose is smaller than the Viking ship, but actually has the same sail capacity. According to the experts at Roskilde, this should ensure a level playing field. The plan: to sail a straight course along Roskilde Fjord over a distance of 1.5 kilometers, just under a mile. The first ship to reach a designated turning point wins. The race begins. The wind direction seems to favor the Viking ship. Its square sail is ideally suited to sailing a straight course with the wind behind it. It rapidly takes the lead.
It's a very long and narrow ship, so it's quite fast when you go with the wind.
The yacht's sail array is designed for zigzagging, not straight sailing. On a downwind course, that puts the yacht at a disadvantage.
The Viking ship itself is going at the same boat speed as ours when we're going downwind. And it's pretty obvious that we, in a modern boat, have a bit of a problem actually holding on to it.
The yacht has to zigzag to make headway. It's clearly finding the going tough, but slowly it's catching up. At the last moment, the yacht overtakes the Viking ship and beats it to the turning point by a hair. But the Viking ship, with its 1,000-year-old technology, has more than held its own.
The speed today was about maybe 8 to 10 knots, I think. I think it did very well, actually.
Thanks to their ships, the Vikings became masters of the sea. During the first half of the 9th century, they raided the coasts of England, Scotland, Ireland, and northern France, virtually unopposed. But ships were only part of the story of Viking success. The Vikings were not only sailors. Once they made landfall, they were epic fighters.
Coming up, steel swords and wooden shields helped as a first line of defense. But what weapons gave them a true advantage in battle? The secrets of the Viking warriors will continue in a moment. National Geographic Channel Presents now continues.
The word Viking conjures an immediate image of a Dark Age warrior, clad in chain mail, armed to the teeth with sword and axe. On his arm, a brightly painted wooden shield. But what kind of weapons technology did the Vikings really have? In recent years, archaeologists have turned up a few surprises. Here at Trondheim Museum in Norway are stored the remains of over 1,000 Viking weapons. Spear and arrow points, shields, axe heads, and swords. When Viking warriors died, their weapons were often buried or cremated with them.
In this museum we have something around 1,000 Viking swords, all found in Middle Norway, from small rusty pieces to some beautiful things.
The finds paint a vivid picture of the kind of weapons the Vikings actually used. But can they explain Viking superiority in combat? Until relatively recently, archaeologists had little idea how Viking weapons were made. Then X-rays of swords revealed a strange herringbone pattern in the blade. But what did it mean? The answer must lie in the way Viking blacksmiths worked the iron to make the swords. We know they used lightweight hammers and hand-driven bellows. But beyond that, the details of Viking forging techniques remained obscure. Enter a modern blacksmith. Caspar Andersson has spent more than half a century at his trade. He's one of the few blacksmiths in the world who practice the lost art of Viking arms manufacture. According to Andersson, Viking weapons were not pressed out of single pieces of steel as we do today. They were assembled piecemeal.
They built up the material either for a sword, spear, arrows, axes. They were all built up.
It's called pattern welding. A blade is a composite of 3 or more thin strips of metal, hammered and twisted and finally welded together.
You start by bending one bar, put this one on, and then you can forge it together and afterwards weld it.
But surprisingly, many of the weapons in Trondheim appear to have been shoddily made, with uneven, poor quality welds. Not what you'd expect from the top warriors of their day.
Some of these are not good. And some of them are so bad that one archaeologist in Oslo said she would never risk her life using a sword like that.
Perhaps the uneven heat given out by hand-driven bellows accounts for the uneven quality of many of the weapons found. But whatever the reason, it seems pattern welding was a hit-and-miss affair. In short, Viking weapons were no better than anyone else's. So what gave the Vikings the edge in combat? If their weapons weren't special, maybe their armor was. Maybe Vikings were so well protected, they were simply harder to kill. How effective Viking armor really was in combat has always been a matter of conjecture, until now. This is the ballistics laboratory of the British Armed Forces Weapons Testing Facility, the Royal Military College of Science. The lab usually checks the effectiveness of body armor worn by today's security forces against modern weapons. But for one day only, it's being put to a different use. We've asked the scientists here to test the defensive capability of Viking armor. Aiding them in their quest is Viking combat expert Kim Sidorn. Today, he's brought along a selection of accurate replicas of Viking-age weapons and armor. With machines like this drop tower, the ballistics team can precisely set the energy and speed needed to deliver a fatal blow. A replica battle axe is about to meet a round shield typical of those used by the Vikings. At first, it bounces off. The reason? The blade is striking across the grain of the wooden shield. But when the blade strikes along the grain of the shield is split. Perhaps another mystery solved. Possibly Viking warriors in the 8th and 9th centuries painted their shields with brightly colored patterns, not simply to decorate them, but to hide the grain from the eyes of an attacker. Such practical ingenuity is certainly a hallmark of Viking weaponry.
Still ahead, does the armor hold the clues to the phenomenal success of the Viking warrior? Did it stop the enemy's blade? More secrets of the Viking warriors in a moment. Welcome back to National Geographic Channel Presents.
The popular image of the Viking warrior today is somebody with cow horns on their helmet, covered in rugs and lots of sort of studded leather, but their armour was much more sensible.
The biggest test of the day involves iron mail. Mail shirts were worn by warriors throughout Europe during the Viking era, not just by the Vikings themselves. It was generally made by riveting together hundreds of small iron rings, but the precise design and manufacture varied. Kim Sidorn has brought along 3 different types of replica mail.
Although all these examples are riveted mail, such as would have been available 1,000 years ago, not all riveted mails are created equal. This one, a Sheldon mail, as you see, is of all riveted links, and the cross-section of that indicates that it is very thin, and of course it means it's very light too, very handy and easy to wear. This one is made once again from all riveted links, and they are of a rounder section.
The third sample is the one to watch. Its design, a combination of flat and rounded rings, is similar to a sample of actual Viking mail found in Norway.
Here we have solid links, which are thick in section, and round links, which are riveted together. And this, I suspect, will prove to be the stronger of the 3.
Right, okay, I set the laser light.
But could it have saved a Viking warrior from death? To compare the effectiveness of the 3 types of mail, a compressed air cannon will fire a replica spear blade at each sample in turn. The air cannon is set. First in the firing line is the flat, lightweight Sheldon mail. The mail offers virtually no protection. The spear blade penetrates to a depth of 12 centimeters, nearly 5 inches, enough to kill a man. The second mail sample fares no better. Once again, the rounded links part easily in the face of a determined spear thrust simulated by the air cannon. Finally, the sample made up of a combination of flat and round rings, the one based on an actual Viking design, is put to the test.
Oh, that's an unexpected surprise. That was the strong sample, and the blade has penetrated it. Not what I expected at all.
Against expectation, the combination mail also failed to resist the spear thrust. But measurement of the degree of penetration reveals something significant. The blade only pierced the mail to a depth of 3 centimeters, just over an inch. Maybe the mail would be more effective if worn with something else, a lesson the Vikings must have learned. So, if this sample was placed over padding, maybe the spear wouldn't penetrate at all. Despite the violence of the blow, Kim Sidorn believes that the mail and padding worn together have proven capable of stopping the spear.
One finger. And that has no parallel hole on the inside. So the mail and the padding have done their job.
In the ballistics test, the kind of mail the Vikings may have used turned out to be the strongest. But strong mail cannot alone explain how Viking warriors dominated Dark Age combat for nearly 200 years. The Vikings were not invincible. Their shields could be smashed, their mail pierced. They could die like anyone else. So what secret battlefield ingredient did they possess that their foes did not? Back at the museum in Trondheim, weapons expert Ann Stalsberg has found a further clue. X-ray analysis of swords recovered from local Viking burial sites has revealed something strange. Beneath centuries of corrosion, clearly visible, are mysterious signs and inscriptions, decoration that was both intricate and costly.
This sword has on one side something like a worm or a snake. That's on one side. On the other side of the sword, we have this sign. We don't know what it means. It's unique.
But the hourglass motif on this sword is only one of many different designs. Time and again, Stalsberg and her team found a variety of decorations, inlays, carvings, and inscriptions. Their exact meaning remains lost, but one thing is clear. The Vikings lavished care upon their swords to an almost obsessive degree.
All the swords that we checked had something on the blade. The blades were not only simple pieces of steel.
So what lies behind this adoration of the blade? An intimate knowledge of an individual weapon's characteristics, maybe. Certainly, a respect and understanding for its strengths and weaknesses. Perhaps a reverence for weaponry meant a reverence for war itself. The Vikings' superiority in combat lay with an attitude of mind, not with hardware.
What really was the difference was not the weaponry, it's the people that used that weaponry. And there, I think, the cult of the Vikings, this cult of violence, was a crucial difference between the two sides.
As the 9th century progressed, Viking raids grew in scale and ambition. Soon, Viking armies were fighting full-scale wars of conquest. Large areas of Western Europe and Russia fell under direct Viking control. As their vanquished foes perhaps were learning, the Vikings' biggest weapon was their fighting spirit.
Coming up, drugs, rage, and hardwired for war. The secrets of the Viking warriors are unveiled on National Geographic Channel Presents. We now return to Secrets of the Viking Warriors.
Viking fighting spirit sprang from their pagan religion. The Vikings believed their destiny was a special one, to fight alongside the gods on the Day of Judgment in the ranks of a divine army. Death was the recruiter, and only the most heroic warriors need apply. Until the final day, the fallen would train in the spiritual realm of Valhalla.
Their heaven was called Valhalla, which was like a sort of a heaven for lager louts with lots of feasting, to which they were carried if they died in battle by the Valkyries, these incredibly fierce, mythical women who rode up into the heavens with them.
To enter the realm of Valhalla, so Viking mythology decreed, warriors must actively seek heroic ways to die. This mythology suggests the Vikings had something their foes did not: a powerful belief in themselves as the gods' appointees for war. In this lab in Stockholm, Sweden, archaeologists believe they've found real evidence of the Vikings' belief in their divine purpose. The team here is examining fragments from a unique site, a warrior garrison found at a place called Birka, a garrison modeled on Valhalla itself.
When you read the Icelandic sagas and so, and the description of Valhalla, it is if you saw the house on Birka.
Buried under the site, archaeologists have discovered a range of objects that paint an intimate portrait of the warriors who lived in the hall.
They would have looked quite impressive, and I think they were interested in looking good. We know that they had combs, all of them, and the comb was hanging from the belt. So the hair was important, and that they looked smart was important.
And there was more. The warriors' belts were decorated with signs and symbols, badges of rank in the pagan world.
The Viking warrior belt was very important, not only because it showed rank, but also it was a symbol of social status, high social status. It's, you could say, almost like a uniform, or the beginning of a uniform.
Among the decorations, a good luck charm in the shape of Thor's hammer, a reminder of the warriors' pagan links. Artifacts recovered by the team reveal how the men lived together, feasted together, and trained together, and women were not allowed.
We think they have been warriors that were well trained, well equipped, but we have found nothing related to female purposes or activities.
Living together in an all-male enclave, adorned with symbols, carrying pagan trinkets, the Vikings of Birka have all the hallmarks of a cult.
Most primitive societies have a cult of the warrior because it is a very dangerous occupation and people need to be psyched up in the modern sense to actually engage in warfare.
For many experts, this cult mentality, perhaps fueled by anti-Christian sentiment, first inspired the audacity of the raids on monasteries like Lindisfarne. It then inspired the Vikings to even bolder acts of aggression in Europe and beyond.
Those who were on the Viking expeditions were all part of a whole movement which had at its centre this cult of violence, this belief that it was somehow divinely ordained to go and attack anybody who came in their way, to conquer, to seize what they could, that it would bring the favour of their gods.
Was this cult of violence really sufficient to account for Viking military prowess? Maybe training and lifestyle alone were not enough to explain Viking success in war. Legend tells of one cult, at least, that took things further, a lot further. Enter an anarchic band of kamikaze-style fighters called the Berserkers. In modern English, the name has come to mean someone in a frenzied rage.
The Berserker would go into battle. They required no armour. They felt themselves completely impervious to weapons. They did quite literally, so far as we know, go berserk as they went into battle.
Contemporary sources had their take on the Berserkers. Madmen in wolfskins used as shock troops by wily chieftains. But in modern times, the Berserker legend has taken on a whole new twist and includes speculation that Berserker battle frenzy was fueled by a form of drugs widely found in Scandinavia: narcotic mushrooms. It sounds bizarre, yet the idea of the Berserkers' drug connection has persisted. So could narcotic mushrooms really be the cause of the Berserkers' rage? These are the mushrooms in question. They're called fly agarics. They grow in forests throughout Scandinavia, and lab tests confirm they're highly narcotic.
The principal components of fly agaric that we're interested in here are muscimol, which has a hallucinogenic effect. The muscimol, the active ingredient, acts on basically the sedating systems within the brain, the inhibiting systems within the brain.
Advocates of the mushroom theory claim you need to take fly agarics in very high doses in order to get the berserker effect. But there's a problem. Besides the hallucinogen, the mushrooms also contain a toxin called ibotenic acid. And in high doses, this causes nasty side effects that are not exactly conducive to combat.
The ibotenic acid component is very irritating to the stomach itself, and so nausea and, in higher doses, vomiting are certainly the principal side effects.
So even if the Vikings knew of fly agaric mushrooms, could their consumption have been of any use in combat? Historians don't rule it out, but they remain cautious.
I think what we have to admit is that the sources we've got are just not consistent enough for us to honestly believe we can reconstruct and say, this is how it must have been.
Back in the real world, the only drug we know the Vikings craved was success. Monastic booty inspired the raiders to return in larger numbers. To go a Viking quickly became a career choice. Step by step, the Vikings were lured into a path of invasion, conquest, international trade, and exploration. What had started off as piracy swiftly became an industry, one that involved the entire community.
You have to think of people with an enormous range of skills: woodworking, boat building, the construction of weapons, down to the women who weave and knit the clothes to keep them warm. There's a very rich social and cultural mix that lies behind the sharp end, if you like, which is that awful image of the Viking leaping off the boat with his sword in his hand.
In short, Viking society became hardwired for war. Within 2 short centuries of the first monastic raids, the Viking sphere of influence stretched from Central Asia to the fringes of North America. The one-time raiders were poised to become conquerors and settlers of new lands.
Still to come, after 2 centuries of successful terror, why did the Viking world collapse? Clues to the puzzle lie in a Viking fortress. Digging into the past, what secrets of the Viking warriors will be revealed when we return. Secrets of the Viking Warriors now continues.
In the 9th century AD, the Vikings rapidly extended their sphere of influence across the globe from Asia to the fringes of North America. But within 2 centuries, the Vikings would find themselves consigned to the back pages of history, their unique achievement blunted by the very success they had craved. How could they rise so fast, yet fade so quickly? What secrets lie behind Viking decline? It looks like something from another world. In the flat Danish countryside, a gigantic circular feature. From the air, its geometry is eerily perfect. But this is no alien crop circle. In fact, it's a Viking fortress. Its name, Trelleborg. Trelleborg comes late in the Viking story. It dates from the end of the 10th century, and it reveals just how far the Vikings had strayed from their origins. Over 200 years earlier, the Vikings had burst onto the scene as sea-born raiders. During the first half of the 9th century AD, they had looted churches and monasteries in Western Europe, a tactic made possible by one thing: their ships. The fortress at Trelleborg was not the work of the sea-born warriors who had rocked the foundations of Western Europe. This was a structure built by people with money and power, who had something to protect. As such, Trelleborg marks a process of rapid social and political change in the Viking world, a process that was eventually to lead to the end of the Viking Age. The story of Viking decline begins, ironically, with one of their greatest successes, the near conquest of a country, England. In 865, a giant invasion fleet carrying thousands of men suddenly appeared off the English coast. Viking raiders were about to become invaders.
Where previously there'd just been a few ships at sea, now there was a great fleet. Hundreds of vessels arriving, carrying thousands of men. As a result, in the 860s and 70s, many of the English kingdoms fell to the Vikings.
It came to be called the Great Army. At first, the English thought it was just another coastal raiding party. But this time, the Vikings didn't leave. They headed inland. The aim was no longer raiding, but conquest.
They moved on to stealing the land itself. And this, of course, is colonization. This is the conquest of territories and their occupation.
Why the Vikings had chosen this moment to change their strategy remains a mystery. But maybe the prospect of England's green and pleasant land had simply become irresistible.
It must have seemed like heaven. Rich farmlands, silver in plenty, plenty to plunder, and then a realization that you could actually take the place over, that it was potentially ripe for the picking. If you had the warrior power, perhaps you could carve out new lands for yourself.
At first, the Vikings swept all before them. They overran East Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria. As historian Sarah Foote has found, contemporary accounts describe the Vikings' terrifying and bloody trail of destruction.
We have some accounts from the early period of the bloodshed, the terror, the devastation.
The Vikings showed no mercy, even to royalty, as the fate of the unfortunate Edmund of East Anglia reveals.
Without ceasing, he called on Christ. This aroused the fury of his enemies, who, as if practicing at a target, pierced his whole body with arrows and inflicting wound upon wound while one javelin made room for another.
It's no wonder the Vikings swiftly terrorized the English into submission. Within a few years of their first landing, Viking advances covered nearly 50% of English territory, leaving only the southern kingdom of Wessex standing firm. But conquering a country was a very different proposition to coastal raiding. The Vikings found themselves fighting a land-based campaign against Anglo-Saxon royal armies. So how did they do it? The key to their success lies with a remarkable tactic. Avoiding pitched battles, the Vikings instead preferred to sally forth from hastily constructed fortified camps. In effect, they adapted the seaborne hit-and-run tactics for which they were famous and transferred them to the land.
It was more a war of maneuver and the taking of fortifications, and that is the real danger for the English kingdom.
The Vikings' campaign climaxed with the final capture of this place. The Vikings called it Jorvik. We know it today as the English city of York.
They marched up here. They managed to win a battle to capture the city. The Anglo-Saxon kings of Northumbria regrouped, tried to counterattack the next year, were defeated. And that really left the great Viking army in control of York.
With the taking of York, the Vikings' transition from coastal raiders to inland invaders was complete. But as they settled down in York, the Vikings were to undergo a further evolution, a process of change that would ultimately cause a crucial split in the Viking world. Archaeologist Richard Hall is taking a trip back through time. For him, the Viking city of Jorvik lies all around him, just beneath the surface of modern York.
The very street we're walking down, Coppergate, was laid out in the Viking Age, and even the properties, even the land divisions between the shops opposite were established for the first time in the Viking Age. So we're really walking around a bit of Viking Age townscape. It's a new creation.
Before the Viking conquest, York was little more than a backwater with a sparse population. But with the victory over the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings saw an opportunity to rebuild the local economy in a completely new way.
The Vikings came along, took this place over, and within 30 to 50 years, they'd pretty well transformed it.
Spurred on by the new Viking regime, York rapidly became a sprawling city.
These streets that we're walking along were huddled close with little shops and properties. It was a low-rise townscape. It was a place where you only had really one story. They were timber buildings, roofed with thatch, and there were no decent paved roads like we see today. The roads were just basically rubble and muck. All of this had a population perhaps of 10, 15, even 20,000 people. So it was an extraordinary place.
Founding a city like this hardly seems to square with the image of Vikings as warriors. So how did it come about? Next, from killing to commerce. What was the catalyst for this Viking transformation? Digs turn up dozens of clues. Secrets of the Viking Warriors is back in a moment, only on National Geographic Channel presents. Artifacts recovered by York archaeologists provide important clues. Over the past 20 years, excavations in the city center have yielded more than 20,000 Viking Age objects. Together, these objects demonstrate that one-time raiders and conquerors had begun to pursue a completely different and unwarlike activity, manufacture. And that's why York grew so big so fast.
We found dozens of these wooden bowls and wooden cups. This was the common tableware of the period. And obviously they were doing this on an industrial scale. This was one of the innovations of the Viking Age in York, that for the first time there was industrial scale production going on.
And the manufacture didn't stop with woodworking. As the Viking market economy grew, metalworkers turned out tons of cheap fashion jewelry.
They were churning the stuff out, mass producing it, in such a way as to make it available just to the man and woman in the street, in a way that hadn't been before.
Leather workers produced mountains of shoes, many with fascinating design features that reveal just how much the people of Jorvik geared themselves to mass production.
The whole sole was detachable, and when you wore through that, you simply ripped it off, threw it away, and the cobbler put a new one on for you.
And incredibly, among the piles of discarded soles, archaeologists found this, an accessory straight out of modern times, a detachable ice skate. Such artifacts reveal that York was an economic first.
It's the role of York as a supplier of local goods which really sets York up and marks it out as a place that's expanding and growing and taking on this new role as a major production centre.
Crucial to York's economic success was the way the Vikings mixed with the local Anglo-Saxons. As the English and Norse emblems on this coin die reveal, to make York a success, the Vikings willingly embraced English culture, including the religion the Vikings once reviled, Christianity.
It's got an inscription in abbreviated Latin that says St. Peter's money. St. Peter is the dedication of the cathedral church, so it's a good Christian inscription. And yet in between it, what have we got? It's a Viking sword. Almost symbolises the coming together of these two peoples, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings.
The people who set up Jorvik as a major production center were no longer the freewheeling Viking warriors of legend. They were part of a machine, an ordered society and economy. York was symbolic of a profound change in the Viking world, one that would change the course of Viking destiny. For the Vikings were beginning to settle and trade not only in England, but in places much further afield. By the mid-9th century, the Vikings' journeys took them through Russia and the Ukraine, where they founded the cities of Novgorod and Kiev, onto the shores of the Black Sea, and even to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. So successful were the Vikings' trading expeditions that many made fortunes. As Viking trading ventures grew, so the Vikings changed the shape and function of their ships. Viking warships were fast, sleek vessels designed for hit-and-run raiding. But Viking merchants needed something different, something that could carry heavy cargo. This is the Marine Archaeology Lab at the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, Denmark. It's here that archaeologist Jan Bill is discovering how big Viking ships were made.
What we're doing now right here at the workshop is that we're documenting one of the planks, one of the big planks from a large Viking ship, which was excavated here a few years ago. And it's a big one, about 36 meters long, so it has been a really large ship.
The planks Bill is examining come from one of 5 large Viking vessels found sunk in the nearby fjord, all dating back to the mid-11th century. Bill's colleagues are slowly piecing the ships together. It's a painstaking mix of forensic examination and conservation. After 1,000 years under the sea, the timbers are no longer timbers, but fragile wooden shells in need of special care.
It's very, very important that we keep those timbers wet all the time, because even though it looks like wood, really it's only 20 or 30 or 40% wood, and the rest is water.
The shape of the plank is crucial to Bill's work. He is using a highly accurate measuring technique to construct detailed models that illustrate the original carrying capacity of Viking cargo ships. By mapping out the planks, Bill has produced data which shows that some of the Roskilde ships could carry up to 24 tons of cargo, a phenomenal load for the time. In ships like these, Viking merchants crossed the Baltic Sea, carrying cargoes to and from their eastern markets. At some point on the journey, many Viking merchants would have paid a visit here, to the Swedish island of Gotland. Gotland straddled Viking trading routes to the east. It nestles in the heart of the Baltic Sea, midway between mainland Scandinavia and Poland. It's a comfortably affluent place today. But during the Viking Age, thanks to its strategic position, the island of Gotland was pretty much the richest place on Earth. For archaeologists, this Gotlandic archive contains a wealth of objects drawn from all over the Viking Age world. Brooches, jewelry, beads, combs, the list goes on. There are over 30,000 artifacts stored here. Like the English city of York, Gotland made its money through one thing: trade.
Gotland was a kind of a middleman in the Baltic Sea, trading with the east and the west, and changing goods from the west to the east. And it seems to be very good in making this kind of middleman business.
Such business netted enormous wealth. In the local museum, one exhibit is kept under lock and key 24 hours a day. They call this the treasure room, and it holds the proceeds from countless trading ventures made by Vikings to the east. Vast hoards of silver.
Most of the hoards from Viking Age are consisting of coins, mainly Arabic coins from the 9th to 11th century. There are also German coins, English coins, and besides coins you have bracelets, and you also have these silver bars, raw material.
To date, archaeologists have recovered over 700 hoards of coins and jewelry on the island of Gotland. The most recent hoard weighed almost 70 kilos, around 150 pounds. That's a lot of silver.
If we put it together, I think that we must talk about tons of silver that has been deposited on the island. And it seems like every farm has at least one silver hoard, which is very, very much if you compare to other parts of Scandinavia.
Significantly, archaeologists found the hoards buried in the foundations of Gotlandic buildings. The Gotlanders, it seems, had a reason to hide their wealth. But why?
It looks like the hoards was not meant to be taken up again. At least I think so. Because we find them in houses, and it seems that they were deposited in one way or another, maybe as a kind of a sacrifice.
Evidence suggests the Gotlanders used their surplus silver as an appeal to the gods to bless their trading ventures. If so, it worked. Gotland remained a symbol of Viking trading wealth for over a century. Yet one group of Vikings was finding itself increasingly on the edge of this bonanza: the warriors. In this brave new world of trade, there were fewer opportunities for warrior clans geared up to pursue glory and adventure through acts of war. But some warriors were not prepared to hang up their swords just yet.
Still to come, warriors grapple for their identity in the new culture. Do the inscriptions on the roadside stones shed light on the mystery and the secrets of the Viking warriors? National Geographic Channel Presents will return in a moment. Secrets of the Viking Warriors now continues. By the mid-10th century, the Vikings had the world at their feet. But wealth and trade were beginning to cause a deep split within Viking society. The warriors who had triggered Viking expansion in the first place found themselves increasingly without a purpose. Traditionally, warrior cults had lived and trained together with one aim: to fight. Viking warriors relished war, but with nowhere left to conquer, they needed to carve out a new role for themselves. They did it in the East. In 988, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II invited a group of Vikings to join his army. The Vikings became known as the Varangian Guard.
The Byzantines used a lot of foreign troops in their armies. They actually had ethnic guard units, as they called them. And one reason was that they could be loyal to the emperor, whereas the native Greeks might not be.
Crucially, Basil paid the Vikings for their services. It marked a trend that had been going on for most of the 10th century. With nothing else to trade, Viking warriors were trading on their reputation. They were selling themselves as mercenaries. But mercenary service turned out to be a poor choice of careers. Matt Larson is an archaeologist. He's on the track of one Viking mercenary adventure that literally went too far. Scattered around the Swedish countryside are standing stones covered in strange inscriptions, runes. Runic is the written language of the Vikings. Larson is one of the few people who can still read it.
Kulla Midguari. They raised this stone in memory of Onunthur, Anund, their father.
These runestones date from the mid-11th century. They tell the fateful story of a large and well-organized Viking expedition to the east.
He was dead in the east with Ingvar. So that's interesting.
The inscription reveals the expedition was led by a man named Ingvar. But where were Ingvar and his followers heading?
There are about 25 to 30 stones in Sweden raised in memory of men going with a chieftain called Ingvar.
Ingvar and his warriors clearly made an extraordinary journey, pushing deep into Asia. But what happened to them? A few kilometers away, another roadside stone yields further clues.
They raised this stone in memory of their father Gunlev. He was with Gwari Tribin. So he was killed, that means. He went to the east with Ingvar and was killed. And that's a bit new information. He wasn't only dead there, but he was killed, and probably that means he was killed in the battle.
Ingvar's men had found work. Larson believes they were hiring themselves out as mercenaries to local potentates. But the sheer number of runestones dedicated to this one trip indicate that something went catastrophically wrong. The last piece of the jigsaw falls into place here, opposite the bright lights of modern Stockholm.
Tula had this stone raised in memory of her son, the brother of Ingvar.
The runic text makes a now familiar mercenary reference.
In the east, they gave the eagle. That means they gave the eagle food, which in turn means they killed enemies. Enemies which could lie in the field, and the eagle could come and eat them. That's the Viking poetry.
But then the runes reveal how the successful mercenaries met an unnamed fate on the shores of the Caspian Sea.
And then it's a new sentence. They died south in Serkland.
As to what ultimately claimed the lives of Ingvar and his followers, the stones are silent. But a later anecdotal account does give a likely explanation.
There is also an Icelandic saga, which is written in the 13th century, and it's telling about sort of plague coming to the expedition and killing Ingvar himself and most of the other members.
Perhaps Ingvar's expedition fell not to war, but to disease. Whatever the cause, Ingvar's demise on the shore of the Caspian Sea marks the end of large-scale Viking mercenary adventures in the East. Even before the Ingvar catastrophe, more and more Viking warriors had abandoned their mercenary activities. In a rapidly changing world, they had returned to their favorite and original occupation, raiding. But their victims this time were not foreigners, they were other Vikings. Swedish archaeologist Lena Holmqvist Olausson has found a spot that symbolizes the disintegration of Viking society during the 10th century. On the lake that runs west from the Swedish capital of Stockholm lies the remains of a wealthy Viking port, Birka. Today, the site is very hard to reach, but in the 10th century, Birka, like Gotland, was a major trading outlet to the east. Archaeologists have long known of Birka's existence, but Olausson has found something which indicates more than a civilian presence on the island. The remains of a barracks and fort that housed a full-time warrior garrison.
The hill fort is one of the few monumental buildings what we have from the Viking age, and the construction was all about 700 meters long and about 1,000 meters of wooden construction. It was a huge engineer work.
Given its location in the heart of Scandinavia, the threat facing Birka must have come from one source only: renegade Vikings. The fearful merchants had hired mercenaries of their own for protection.
Coming up, the ultimate expression of the Vikings' defensive trend. Trelleborg. It is a fortress only raiders by design could engineer. More secrets of the Viking warriors in a moment.
At her lab in Stockholm University, Olausson and her team are using high-tech forensic techniques to piece together life in the Birka garrison. Study of the remains of weapons and clothes reveal the soldiers had spent time in the East, a strong indication of their mercenary pedigree.
Parts of the uniforms are typical objects that they brought back from eastern parts. Some of the weapons, some of the arrowheads that we find are typical for eastern countries. And of course coins, lots of coins. Almost all the coins from the garrison are Islamic coins.
The warriors of Birka, their task was to protect Birka from attacks from sea-born warriors.
The wealthy traders of Birka were right to fear an assault on their town. In 970 AD, the garrison disappeared and Birka was abandoned.
What we think happened at last at a garrison, that it was an attack coming from the sea.
Birka fell to a classic seaborne attack. The very tactic that had brought Vikings wealth in the first place was now being used against them. The split in Viking society was now almost complete. By the end of the 10th century, the rulers of the Viking world found themselves devoting enormous resources to protecting their lands from competing groups of hostile Viking warriors. The ultimate expression of this defensive trend
is the Danish fortress at Trelleborg, an extraordinary feat of civil engineering.
Trelleborg is very impressive. It's a circular banked enclosure 150 yards across, essentially the area of 12 soccer pitches inside. It's a testament to the Viking Age ability at construction and engineering to create such forts which hadn't been seen since Roman times.
Astonishingly, Trelleborg is not unique. It's part of a defensive chain designed to protect Viking Denmark from other Vikings. Fortresses like Trelleborg demonstrate how much the Viking world was unraveling and how great a threat warriors of the old school had become to the new Viking order.
Conquering large areas of Western Europe brought them into contact with the structures of kingship in Western Europe to such a degree that they adopted them, and Scandinavia in fact did become absorbed into the wider European community of that time.
Rulers like Harald Bluetooth, who may have built Trelleborg, no longer won power at the point of a sword, but by right of birth. As kings collected taxes, they made laws. They were no longer warlords. They were landlords. For many Viking warrior chieftains, it was too much. Loners with names like Eric the Red, Egil Skallagrimsson, and Leif Erikson decided to leave home and head west into the unknown. The evolution of the Vikings was about to enter its final phase. In just 2 centuries, they had grown from raiders to invaders to international traders. Now a group of independent-minded warriors was to embark on a huge gamble, the exploration and settlement of a new continent. As the Viking Age drew to a close, one last great adventure was about to begin. Legend has it that in 1000 AD, some 500 years before Columbus, the Vikings reached America. It's a fantastic claim. For many years, few historians believed it could be true, not least because it was based on anecdotal evidence. Medieval sagas written by the Vikings' Icelandic descendants. If the Vikings had reached America, why had they left behind no physical trace of their existence? True, there was evidence of a progressive wave of transatlantic Viking settlement. By 900 AD, Vikings were living on Iceland. By 980, Vikings were sailing from Iceland to the southeastern coast of Greenland. It would only take one further step to reach the coast of North America. But that step was a giant leap of nearly 600 miles. Across one of the roughest seas in the world, the North Atlantic. How could Viking ships and Viking crews sail in waters such as these? How would they find their way? Modern ships navigate by using satellite-based global positioning systems. These can tell the skipper precisely where he is in relation to his destination at any time, day or night, no matter what the weather. The Vikings, of course, had no access to technology like this. So what are the secrets of Viking navigation? This object may hold a clue. Archaeologists call it a sun compass. Its design is based on an object discovered in Greenland nearly 60 years ago.
In 1948, there was made a find in Greenland, and this find was a little disc, and on this disc was incised some lines. You can see there's a curved line, and that's what we call a gnomon line. And the trick of the compass is that when you just land this sharp tip of the shadow on the curve, then you have a true compass.
Simple, yet effective. But the compass only works when it's sunny. What happens if there is no sun? The sagas had an answer. They tell of magic sunstones that guided Vikings through bad weather by emitting strange colors. Incredible, but was it true? In the alien terrain of Iceland, there exists a kind of crystal with properties that might fit the description of the magic sunstones given in the sagas. Maybe the Vikings found the crystal during their first exploration of the island.
Well, the idea is that you are looking up into the stone from beneath, and then when you turn the stone, you will see the color, the light change, and when you have the right direction to the hidden sun, then you will see a special color in the Kaldspar.
But there's a catch. For the stone to work, the sky directly above must be clear, and the sun no more than 10 degrees above the horizon. Conditions so particular as to virtually rule out the crystal as a reliable navigational aid.
We have tried to make the sunstone work, but we haven't succeeded here, actually.
For Vinner and other experts, the secret of Viking navigation lies not so much in fanciful instruments, but in simple seamanship. Watching the flight patterns of birds, noting changes in the current and the winds, and of course, making the best of good old-fashioned luck. By good seamanship, Viking mariners found their way across the Atlantic and brought news of encounters with strange landscapes. But good seamanship would count for nothing if Viking mariners failed to survive the rigors of a long voyage. And in open boats, in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, conditions were perilous.
Next, the Vikings' prowess is proven. But how did the sailors survive nature's elements and stay warm and dry as they crossed the unpredictable Atlantic? The conclusion of Secrets of the Viking Warriors after this. And now the conclusion of Secrets of the Viking Warriors.
At the Roskilde Viking Ship Museum, these two men have agreed to take part in a demonstration especially for this film. The plan, to compare the thermal efficiency of Viking-style mariners' clothing against a modern wet-weather outfit as worn by seafarers today. The modern suit is made of highly impermeable synthetic fabric. It's worn over a base layer of insulating synthetic thermal underwear. The Viking-style costume consists of an outer layer of goatskin, treated with fish oil and tallow fat to make it water and wind resistant. The undergarments are made from wool. Both sets of clothing function by warming air trapped between the underwear and the outer garment. By measuring any temperature change in the insulating air, we hope to compare the thermal efficiency of the two outfits. Our volunteers spend an hour exposed to a temperature of around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat lost by the two outfits is then measured. Surprisingly, the replica Viking clothing has lost heat much more slowly. This test at least points to one conclusion. Based on a 1,000-year-old design, the Viking garment has proved to be a more efficient insulator. So, Viking clothing technology and Viking seamanship, together with archaeological evidence of progressive hops across the Atlantic, indicate that the Vikings were capable of that final step to America. But did they do it? The short answer is yes. In 1960, archaeologists discovered an actual Viking site in North America. This reconstruction is built on the foundation of the original. The settlement was situated on the island of Newfoundland, at a remote spot with a French name, L'Anse aux Meadows. It was an amazing find, proof positive that in the 11th century AD, Vikings had indeed reached the New World. But Los Olmedos, it turns out, bears no resemblance to the landing place described in the Vikings' own sagas, a utopian spot they called Vinland. If archaeologists could find the real Vinland, maybe they could finally lay the Viking story to rest, and perhaps reveal how events in North America came to signal the effective end of the Viking Age. Such a challenge has prompted Swedish archaeologist Mats Larsson to continue the search for Vinland. It's a quest that has taken him all over the maritime region of North America. Some 1,300 kilometers southwest of Los Olmedos, around 800 miles, Larsson has narrowed his search to the southern tip of Nova Scotia, near the port of Yarmouth. The rich farmland of the region testifies to a milder climate than that of Newfoundland. The vegetation is similar to that described in the Vinland sagas, but there was something more. Something special about the way the sea and the coast were interacting.
The sagas tell that when Leif Erikson came to his settlement in Vinland for the first time, his ship was stranded when the tide was low, and it was far from the sea.
So the first distinctive feature Larsson needed to locate was an estuary with a strong tidal reach. He found it here at the mouth of the Chicagan River. Twice a day, the tide ebbs and flows with dramatic speed. The sea retreats a distance of nearly a mile and then comes surging back. But an estuary with a strong tidal reach wasn't the only unusual feature described in the sagas. They tell of a nearby saltwater lake through which ran a freshwater river.
According to the sagas, the Norsemen settled on a lake through which the river flowed, and the lake was close to the estuary of the river. And that's exactly how conditions are here at Chicagan. Though the former tidal lake is now diked, which means the river can flow out, but the high water can't come in.
The dike has since caused the saltwater lake to all but disappear. But the Chicagan River does indeed flow through the one-time lake bed and empties into the sea. For Larsson, this is strong circumstantial evidence that he has found the real Vinland. But so far, he lacks only one thing: physical proof. Aided by a local Canadian archaeologist, Larsson is taking bore samples in fields just inland from the Chicagan estuary. He's looking for concentrations of phosphate, a telltale sign of early human occupation. To date, the phosphate mapping has remained inconclusive, but Larsson remains undeterred.
I have been disappointed many times looking here, but I always come back here because I think, is there any other place? And I think about it and look around. There isn't any other place which fits so well.
Chicagan may one day yield up its secrets. In the meantime, Vinland remains symbolic of the Vikings' last attempt at expansion, and the venture ended in disaster. The Vinland sagas tell of encounters between Viking settlers and a ferocious foe: Native American tribesmen. The sagas have a word for them: Skraelings. They were part of the great Algonquin nation. In the woodland of Nova Scotia, it's easy to imagine Algonquin raiders tempted by the isolated Viking turf houses.
The Viking communities of North America must have been pretty frail organizations, small in number and with no real line of communications back home. So perhaps it's not surprising that they were eventually overwhelmed by the primitive, the Stone Age culture of the people that they called the Skraelings, the natives to that land.
Historians don't know for sure what happened in America, But the sagas do relate tales of killing. The Algonquin braves who encountered the newcomers were not afraid of the Vikings' iron weapons. They knew nothing of the Vikings' fearsome reputation. In the Algonquin, the Vikings had finally met their match. After several years, the Vikings left Vinland, never to return. The expulsion from America marks the effective end of the Viking Age. For over 2 centuries, the Vikings had seemed invincible. No venture was too great, no challenge too tough. But in the end, it was their thirst for glory that was to be their undoing. The Vikings' genius was sacrificed on the altar of their ambition. In this new world, now governed by feudal law, the warriors who had once worn a pagan badge of courage were destined to die out. In their wake came other kinds of Viking, the trader, the priest, and the kingly ruler. There was no longer room for the Viking spirit.